for you today, and I'll actually, as we take our seats, ask the ladies to identify themselves, to present themselves to you so that you can get to know who they are and what their roles and responsibilities are in their respective organizations. As we mentioned, we have Guaranteed Rate, we have Quicken, and we have Roostify. So I'm actually going to start with Rebecca. Rebecca?
Sure. Hi, I'm Rebecca Blavelil. I'm the Chief Compliance Officer at Guaranteed Rate. Guaranteed Rate is a national lender. We lend in all 50 states. We did about $23 billion last year in closed mortgages between Guaranteed Rate and Guaranteed Rate Affinity, which is another mortgage shop under our umbrella, not nearly as large as Quicken, but we aspire.
Come on with us.
And Rhonda?
I'm Rhonda McGill. I'm the Director of Legal Compliance Operations for Quicken Loans, and we also national lender all 50 states. Our team is dealing with all things AML, marketing compliance. I deal with the licensing for both the mortgage loan originators as well as for the company, regulatory reporting, and fair lending. I think that's everything, but glad to be here.
And last but not least, we have Doreen.
Hello, I'm Doreen Boussard, Director of Regulatory Compliance from Roostify. Roostify is not a financial institution, but we are a SaaS company, software as a service, and we provide a POS, so a digital lending platform for financial institutions and lenders to be able to obtain electronic applications, be able to close mortgage quicker, faster, efficient, and cheaper.
Thank you. So for our session this afternoon, we're actually going to start with Doreen, and we're going to cover how compliance doesn't stop just after you've completed the system build. So Doreen, I'll start with you.
Absolutely.
Oh, I'm sorry, Rebecca. I meant to start with Rebecca.
Oh, sure.
Apologies, Doreen.
I was going to let her answer it.
I said this is going to be easy.
Right. So, I think the interesting thing, when you're working in technology and you're dealing with consumers, you constantly have to be aware of the consumer experience. One of the panelists earlier, who was here from the CFPB, was talking about, fairness, access, and transparency. And I think that as compliance professionals, we always have to be aware of those issues and be thinking about those three things, right? And that really comes in a couple of ways. You're really working with your technology teams and you're really working with your marketing teams to make sure that they understand those principles and the regulations that underlie those principles, because there's a lot of them that they have to deal with. And I think one of the things that we've experienced in particular, our tech guys are really interested in putting together a super cool, super sleek product for consumers. And that's based on their experience, not necessarily an understanding of regulations. I can give you a for instance. We all have to collect government monitoring information. It helps the government determine whether or not we are acting as a fair lender. Within our digital application, one of the tech guys wanted to say, the only language he had on that slide where the GMI was collected was, you don't have to answer these questions. He didn't tell the consumer why we were collecting that information, who's collecting that information, what that information was going to be collected for, and why it's important that consumers provide this information. And I went back to him, I said, do you get what this is about, why we're collecting this info? And he said, the government makes you ask these questions. I'm like, well, let me talk to you a little bit about fair lending and what fair lending, what those principles are about, how our regulators are going to hold us, the standards they're going to hold us to as we reach out to consumers. This is actually super important, and it's super important that we actually encourage consumers to complete this information. So things like that are things that your tech guys may not be thinking about. Same thing on the marketing side. I'm sure you're going to talk a lot about that. I think UDAP is one of the areas where we focus a lot with our marketing team. We do consistent trainings with them. And I think the hardest thing for marketing teams, and I'm sure you'll have this experience as well, is that these folks have been working in the mortgage industry, right? So they don't have the mindset of your typical consumer. They don't, the impression on the reader for the marketing person who does this day in and day out is quite different than on the unsophisticated, young, first-time home buyer who has no idea about financial products or services. And so helping them, I said to one of the folks in the marketing team the other day, take this home to your mom and ask her what she thinks this says. And then come back to me and tell me what she thought it said. And it was different than what she was trying to say. So, offering employees those types of lessons are important as well. Allison mentioned earlier, just because you're a group and you have the same goal doesn't mean that you're a team. I think that's really important when we're talking about compliance and all of the various teams that we have to work with. We have to instill in them that we have a common goal and we are a team that has to achieve that goal, and really building that foundation of education and understanding so that they don't just think you're compliance coming in and saying this is a regulation and you have to comply with it. Educating them on why it's important and what it means to the consumers and what it ultimately means to the company is a big part of our jobs.
So Rebecca, you mentioned fairness. As you're developing your platforms and your outreach initiatives to consumers, how are you ensuring fairness from a compliance perspective is embedded in your systems, in your conversations, et cetera? What are you doing internally that ensures that?
Yeah, fairness is always a hard one, right? And I think fairness comes with clear, conspicuous, accurate disclosures. Guarantee Rate prides itself on making the most information available to its consumers. So if you go to our website, you don't even have to submit an application. You can just put in some parameters about yourself, and you can get information about products that may be available to you. And I think that's a big part of fairness is actually access. I mean, I think those three things go together so clearly because when you have a loan officer who's having a one-to-one conversation with a consumer, they may not offer to that consumer all of the available options. I think that's the great part about technology is that it creates a much more level playing field, particularly as it relates to fairness. You can go in, they can see what a 15-year mortgage looks like. They can see the difference between an FHA and a conventional loan. They can learn a lot about our products and services just by interacting with our technology in a way that they otherwise couldn't if they're just having a conversation with a loan officer who wants to get on to the next transaction. So for us, our website has been a great tool to reach a lot of consumers that we typically wouldn't be able to reach, who actually now can come to the loan officer and say, well, I saw this on your website. That's the one I want, right? That's what I want. And we're actually working towards creating the digital mortgage where the consumer, right now they can pick their own product, but they can't lock their loan. We're moving towards, you pick what you want, you can lock your loan, then you have a conversation with your loan officer. He can help you explore whether or not you picked the right one. But it really, really puts the power in the consumer's hands.
That's very, very helpful. Thank you. We're going to circle back, but at this point, I'd like to transition to Rhonda. And Rhonda's going to share with us some of her key thoughts around how do you audit for compliance from a marketing perspective using technology?
It's so some days it's easier than others. I would have to say Quicken Loans probably has one of the largest marketing programs in the mortgage industry. My team of marketing compliance specialists, they look at over 20,000 plus marketing creative annually, and that's in all channels. And it's so massive that you have to literally lift the hood on a regular basis, kick the tires, make sure that you're doing the right thing. We have to depend on third-party partnerships, utilization of our IT team to help us to build proprietary technologies so that we can maintain, track, store, take a second look, sometimes a third or fourth look at our marketing pieces just to make sure that we are getting out to the consumer the right thing. We are so proudful on the ability to do the right thing, and we take very seriously the desire to do the right thing, and I don't think that anybody in this room would want to do anything wrong by a consumer. So that sometimes means you have to kind of pause and you have to look at everything to make sure that everything that you're sending out, you feel comfortable with it. If it lands in a regulator's door, you want to make sure that you're okay with them looking at that, and that's where we aspire to be. But when you have that many pieces going out, sometimes you miss something. We have a team of about 4 people that are looking at all of this stuff throughout the course of the year, and we have several partnerships. So we work very closely, not plugging Performline, but we're plugging them. But we work very closely with Performline because there's only so much we can do out there in the web space, and we want to know that our brand is being upheld as far as its integrity. So we have to make sure that we're utilizing every opportunity to track our brand and make sure that things are right. And when those things are wrong, we have to get after it to make sure that we're righting those wrongs and fixing them, so that we can make sure that we're, again, doing the right thing. So lots of auditing in our end of the world.
That's great, Rhonda, and thank you. So as a follow-up, what I would ask is, can you give us some live, but confidential, not sharing confidential information, examples of some of the challenges you have faced on the marketing side and using technology to audit for compliance, things that may have slipped through the cracks that you've had to solve for, other things that you've done really successfully over the years?
I would say one of our challenging areas has always been direct mail. I think most people kind of feel the same way. Direct mail is always a constant beast, because no matter what, even though I probably, and maybe I'm the only person in the room, I never look at direct mail solicitations. I throw them away. But for some reason, our marketing team thinks they're the best thing since grits and gravy. So we do over 1.5 million pieces of direct mail a month. So in terms of unique actual direct mail pieces, it could be anywhere from 50 to over 150, depending on how heavy they're going to be loading on that direct mail campaign. So when that's happening, we are constantly looking at all of these individual direct mail pieces that are getting ready to go out the door, and you're trying to make sure, are we substantiating everything? Did we make sure we got all the disclosures correct? Is the APR correct? And I mean, there's always constantly these things. Well, guess what? We're moving at warp speed, because it's not just about the direct mail team. We got the email, we got website, somebody's got to go and stand there in the studio so that Jay Farner can record a radio announcement. I mean, there's always something that's going on. And again, our team is pretty small, but they are pretty damn impactful. They make things happen. So yeah, when you look at TV and you look at in your mailbox, you're always seeing the Rocket Mortgage logo, or you're seeing something from Quicken Loans, because we've got that compliance piece that's always moving and shaking and on the go. I would say in terms of a challenge, our challenge is always the marketing team itself. Our marketing team is a lot of folks they came straight from college into a marketing career, but they didn't have the mortgage background. And when you have that, a lot of it is taking the time to really figure out what are the training needs of that particular group of people in order to get them up to speed, so that they can understand that there are some rules that are around this. You can't just make that nice pretty flyer or that nice pretty commercial. There's some rules that go with it. So we're constantly trying to find innovative ways to get in front of our marketing team and make sure that they don't see us as, oh God, here comes legal or here comes compliance, but hey, these are our trusted advisors, and if they come to us and they have something that they're trying to share, we want to make sure that we're entering into the conversation as a friend and not a foe, because we need them to depend on us to give them the information that they need to do their jobs.
Thank you. That was very insightful. Now we're going to return, and I'm actually going to give Rebecca and Rhonda a heads up that you won't need, because you're next. But I'd like you, while we're talking to Doreen in this time, to think about the impact of privacy on the work that you do. So while you're thinking about that, let's visit with Doreen from Roostify, and let's talk about platforms. Let's talk about the integration of regulatory compliance into existing platforms, or into the release of new products into the marketplace. Doreen?
Sure, absolutely. So with impact compliance, we play with our Roostify is building a consumer-friendly product, but then at the same time looking at the nuances of each regulations. Regulations that were written in 1945 and regulations to today's market, what we are doing. So sometimes it becomes very challenging to implement a product where we can make sure that the consumers and loan officers are collaborating for the greater good. They're going from their loan application. It's an easy, seamless process, but then at the same time, it's something that the borrower can relate to, understand. And our platform, when we look at it, we want to make sure that It is simple language. The borrower, this is a borrower who's probably refinancing their house for the first time and they purchased a house 20 years ago, or a borrower, this is their first purchase. So going through a mortgage application process, I mean, it is pretty challenging to your normal person. Going through our platform, we have to ensure that the borrower understands the information that is being asked for of them in a very simple layman format. So it's not being asked in language that doesn't make sense. If a borrower gets stuck on a certain page, they have the ability to interact with their loan officer and chat with them and really ask, well, what are you asking for here? The other things that we have to consider is, of course, the huge one that governs us is ECOA. So going through the application process, we want to make sure that we are not violating any of the prohibited bases, age, gender, marital status, and those questions are not derived to make sure that these questions are leading up to a credit decision that will entail and be in this black area of ECOA. The other big thing that we look at while we're building our platform is Web Content Accessibility Guideline, which is required by ADA, Americans with Disability Act. So our platform doesn't cater to just one spectrum of consumers, but what we're building is to be able to offer it to all borrowers despite of their susceptibilities across the board. So if somebody who is colorblind be able to go in and be able to apply for a mortgage end-to-end process versus a person who has the ability to see, or for a person who needs to zoom in and zoom out. Those are some of the things that we look at. We definitely track new regulations that are either being amended, modified, and how does that apply to Roostify what we do? How does that impact our loan officers? How does that impact our borrowers? And again, to be able to close a loan, and of course in the end, the lender can go and sell that without having a buyback. So those are some of the things that we are look at and collaborate with our clients, with their compliance and legal team. Of course, you guys know there are certain times where there's many interpretations to a law because we as compliance, we work in a lot of gray areas, right? So then you start filing those gray areas mentally. Is this in the light gray section or the dark gray section? Oh no, this is in the very black section that I shouldn't even be touching at this point. So those are some of the things we look at when it comes to our platform, is to ensure that our consumers are served, but then at the same time we are supporting our financial institutions and the loan officer to collaborate.
And Doreen, in the course of executing all of the things that you've spoken about, are there some best practices that you can share with us around making sure that you successfully incorporate the letter of the law, the spirit of the law, and the nuances of the law in the platforms that you design and develop?
Absolutely. So one of the things Rebecca said is working with our DevOps engineer. I mean, these guys don't know law. All they know is their codes, how they're going to build logic, and how they're going to write it. So most of the time, it's working with our internal team and educating them, and they want to know why. Our team, we have a small team of people, but it's really interesting to educate them. Why are they building this? Is it because something that I'm compliance, illegal, and I'm just going to be a blocker and I'm telling you? No, it's when they can relate, when you put them in a consumer's perspective and they're building something and you tell them, how does this question sound to you? When we're building this new product, this new feature, how does this sound to you? So educating them, showing them, making sure. One of the things we internally do is before we launch a product is we involve the whole company. We call it beta testing. So grab your lunch, come to this conference room, and let's walk this product from beginning to end. And everybody, it's called bug bash. So we start looking at problems that me from compliance, mental, I'm not thinking about it, or from legal, we're not thinking about it, from product, not thinking about it. But, other people in the organization putting themselves in a position of a borrower can come up and say, well, I was unable to answer this question, or I was unable to toggle back or forth. we definitely put that through a UAT testing internally. The other thing we do is, my team or I, is our continuous monitoring and testing program as well, is looking at our program every so often and going back and testing it from cradle to grave to ensure that, what is our platform doing, what are the information being asked, what is the regulation asked for, where are we meeting, where are some questionable items, and before we release item, of course, we go through our QA process. And of course, with web content accessibility, because codes are changing so often, we make sure that we have certifications and internal training to ensure that we are compliant at all times. To expand a little bit more, because we are a SaaS and a POS company, we are always thinking in our mind as a fintech company, how do we innovate? What is it going to take us to get to the next level? But then, you get a deflated balloon and then you look at these regulations that is not asking, it's just impossible. So what are we doing today? We are putting ourselves, and we want to work with the regulators. We want to work with CFPB. We want to work with OCC open ourselves up to say, hey, this is what we are doing. This is what we are providing to the industry. Work with us, understand this, and definitely getting in front of the regulators. One thing I definitely want to, get it out there. If there is a new regulation or an amended regulation and there is a proposed commentary open for you all to interact and provide comments, please do so, because, again, my conversation earlier today, these regulators, they probably don't have knowledge of how fintech, regtech work, and it's probably an outcry internally from them to understand that. So please, get involved, provide commentary, because in the end, it's going to help us understand and go forward what we're doing.
Thank you. We don't have a lot of time left for our conversation. 30 minutes goes very, very quickly. I know I asked you to think about privacy. I want to do two things. I want to get your thoughts in the next literally minute, maybe 10 seconds, about privacy and how it impacts you. And then I'd like to open it up to the audience to see if they have any questions that they'd like to ask you directly.
I love direct questions. Privacy, I think the thing that's keeping me up at night right now is the CCPA, which I think you've all heard of and are thinking about. Anybody who operates in the state of California has to be prepared for that. I think as mortgage lenders, right, we typically are working in the United States, so we haven't really had to think much about GDPR. We don't intentionally reach into Europe. We don't deal with EU citizens. But California CCPA in a lot of ways is GDPR, in a lot of ways is worse than GDPR. So privacy is something that we think about all the time. In addition to that, obviously, we deal with Graham Leach Bliley. But on top of that, I think the biggest thing that I think about in terms of consumer privacy, mortgage companies are very, very attractive targets to bad actors, right? We have tons of information, so much MPI. We basically have we know everything about these consumers. And so we have so much information. We have thousands of employees, right? Tons of loan officers out there. So we're particularly vulnerable to phishing attacks. So I think one of the things that we think about from a compliance perspective on a daily basis, we're super integrated with our security team. We're constantly phishing our own employees. We brought the FBI in to do a little training with them. We're trying to educate our consumers. Consumers are also direct targets of bad actors. It's not just us, right? In a transaction, you've got a real estate agent, you've got a title company, and their security may not be as good as yours. And so those folks are going to try to jump into that transaction and get your consumer to wire funds to an account that doesn't belong to the title company. And then you've got a consumer who's out $50,000, $300,000. Having that conversation with them where you explain to them that they just fell victim to a phishing scheme, that their money is gone, is not a conversation that any of you want to have. So making sure that your vendors are secure. It's not just that you're secure, but that your vendors are secure, that you have conversations with agents and others that you work with in the transaction, and that you're educating your consumers constantly about these types of schemes is so important.
Thank you, Rebecca. Rhonda?
Ditto.
Okay, all
I
right.
have nothing more to say. Yeah, I think that, you know, just because, and we're dealing with a platform that people are accessing through the web, we're constantly trying to make sure that people know who we are. So when you're entering your information, you know you are in the walls of Quicken Loans, and we take your data very, very, very seriously. We're in the process now of hiring our chief privacy officer. So if anybody you know is out there, holler. But we have a team that's specifically dedicated to privacy, and that is literally all they do is kick the tires. They work very closely with our InfoSec team and just make sure that any opportunity where a consumer is coming into our walls for business, that we're locking down. We're figuring out ways to lock everything down. Even with our mortgage bankers, when they're doing their NMLS, their CE, things like that, there's ways to make sure that we're locking them down and making sure that their information is safe too. So it's a very serious challenge for us on a regular basis, but one that we are glad to accept because it's most critical to making sure that we're protecting the consumer's business.
Thank you. And Doreen, maybe in like 20 seconds, because I do want to allow a couple of questions before we have to leave the stage.
Sure, definitely. Privacy is a huge effort in our company, again, because we're collecting data at all times and what happens to those data. So our legal team right now is focusing on CCPA and GDPR, also interacting with our clients to ensure what they are doing and where we can connect to ensure that we are meeting these requirements.
Thank you. Are there any questions that you'd like to ask directly to our panelists?
Easy crowd.
So I just a couple, one quick thing that I would note, so there's all these mortgage laws you have to remember to comply with. Keep in mind that there are other regulations. TCPA hits everybody. ADA hits everybody. The things that I would think about a lot, ADA compliance, there's lots of plaintiffs out there. And they're free tools that your developers can use. They're available on the web. I would have your developers do that. It's an important exercise, and it's very costly to the company if you fail to comply. TCPA keeps me up at night.
Sure.
It's not about if you're going to get sued, it's when. So making sure that you're leveraging technology in particular to ensure your TCPA compliance, your disclosures are accurate in that realm. That's the first thing that they're going to attack when they sue you, is that you didn't have prior express written consent. So think about those things in addition to all the mortgage regulations.
So I think we have a question.
Oh.
So all of you guys have been disruptors in this space, which is excellent. But as you get bigger and as more technology is coming in, how do you keep innovating? What's the sort of one thing that you would recommend others out here as you get bigger think about X? Because you were disruptors yesterday. You need to be disruptors going forward as well.
I'll take that. So, Roostify, we're known as disruptors. First we went out and we built a platform which was a digital application. Now, how do we expand? How do we look outside the box? Then we started looking at how can the consumer go in and also pull their bank accounts at the same time while they're applying for a mortgage loan. Just really looking at the mortgage process end to end, where a consumer is impacted, where a loan officer is impacted, where the loan processes are impacted, and how can we put that all into one platform and be able to do that seamlessly rather than waiting for your verification of employment or your 4506T, you're pulling that. So how can we do that all into one platform, and what does that entail? Now, these are great ideas, but then again, regulations are what keeps us up at night, but we always think about how can we innovate, how can we streamline the process, and how can we empower the borrower, the applicant, to be able to take control of their loan application, and what are those things that they can do?
Yep. I think it's key to not be complacent, right? It's easy to get to where we are, and then you see somebody coming up from behind and they pass you. And those are the folks that are paying a lot of attention to technology. They're paying a lot of attention to consumers' interests and consumer needs. You always have to remember who your customer is in order to be successful. And that's the one thing that I think sometimes people lose sight of as they grow.
Totally agree.
Thank you very much, ladies. That was a wonderful panel.
Thank you guys.
We're